It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Before we start this episode, quick word of warning and apology. Unfortunately, the technology was against me and we had some echo on my feed. Sensei Simon sounds nice and clear, so you should be able to hear him correctly. And I think you can still understand me. I try to clear it up, but it is what it is. My apologies, and I hope you're gonna enjoy this episode. Hello, this is your host, Les Bubka, and welcome to today's episode of Anxious Black Belt, a podcast that focuses on karate, mental health, and everything in between. If you enjoy my content and would like to support, there's few easy ways to do it. First one is simply to listen to another episode. This helps a lot. Second one, you can buy me a coffee via buy me a coffee link in the show notes. And the third one is to support my work. I'm an author and selling few books. You can find them on Amazon or directly on my website. Link in the show notes below. If you would like to stay up to date with what's coming up, be sure to follow me on social media at lesbubka. And now let's get back to the show. Enjoy! Hello and welcome, Simon. Haven't seen you for some time. Nice to catch up.
It's been a while, Les, hasn't it? It has been a while. Good to see you.
My apologies. I know I promised I'm gonna go to your seminar, the Free Amigos, but as you know, life is busy, children, teaching, and so on. So,
Yeah, I've noticed how you're a busy man these days, which is excellent because it's all in a good cause as well, which I'm very impressed with.
oh, thank you very much. So you're kind of a legend in UK in karate. You are one of the precursors of karate in UK. How did you get involved in karate in particular?
That's high praise. I would say I was second generation. Um, I actually come from quite an unusual background. My grandfather, who was a Russian immigrant, was a jujitsu practitioner, and my father, who was very keen to meet my mother, realized that he may need to get his potential father-in-law on his side. So he enrolled in doing classes with my grandfather. My father actually also did judo as well. And so I was brought up in a household where Japanese martial arts, judo and jujitsu were the norm. And I thought everybody did it. And then what actually happened was how I got involved with karate was that I started in about 66 doing jujitsu and judo. The jujitsu thing came from, I think my grandfather was often left babysitting me. And I was, today I'd be I looked upon as a hyperactive child. So he started teaching me jujitsu, basically ukemi, break falls, as a form, I think, of just entertaining me. And then I sort of moved into doing more proper judo with my father, and eventually obtained third dan some many years later. I trained in Japan in judo as well, but the whole thing came about with karate was that we'd gone to an exhibition and I was a youngster, and I mean I was like 6 or 7. And there was a karate demonstration, and it was mainly the top Shotokan Japanese demonstrating. So it was ONeal Sensei, Shirai, and I said to my father, I want to do karate. I really want to do it. And my father was a little bit reticent. He says, I don't think they teach children. And he was absolutely right. So I ended up, a friend of his that did judo had also started doing karate, and he came around the house and showed me some bits and bobs, and he was training with Tatsuo Suzuki Sensei. So I started informally doing Wado. Suzuki Sensei found out that that my friend's father was teaching me, and we were both summoned to his dojo. And at that time, the family, we'd moved down from Liverpool due to my dad's work. My dad was a musician, so we were living in the London area. So I went and demonstrated the Pinan, the first two Pinan kata to Suzuki Sensei, and he agreed to allow me to carry on training, but in a restricted way, because he was very concerned that he didn't have, well, at that time there were no children training, no under 16s training. And that's where I really started. And then with the family moved eventually back to Liverpool, I did a short stint of time doing Shukokai with a guy called Alan Rushby, who was based in Doncaster, due again to my father moving around. But we eventually moved back to Liverpool, and I met ONeal Sensei. And after that, it was like, it wasn't to do with style. It was more to do with Terry. He was just this larger than life character, okay, great role model for a potentially delinquent child, which I was drifting towards being. So I basically started training with Terry. The problem was at first my training was very sporadic, because I was reliant on my father getting me to training. We were living the other side of Liverpool to where he was teaching. So that had to change. And as I got older and I could be responsible for my own travel arrangements, that started to change. And that's really how I got into, my early days of doing martial arts. But I can't remember a day, okay, between the ages of 6 to 16 where I didn't have a kyogi on, or I wasn't doing some martial arts somewhere. And I'd be classified as ADHD today, because I just, I was one of, several children in the household of different ages, and it's one of them things that at a young age you clamor for attention. But I think back in my day, kids were certainly a lot more active. There was at school, sports and physical education were part of the standard curriculum. And I enjoyed being outside. I still do. I hate being cooped up. The lockdown thing that we've just all lived through a couple of years ago drove me nuts. Okay. I was out in the garden constantly, much to the entertainment of a little old lady that used to live with her window looking into our garden. And bless her, she'd sit every day I went out to train and watch me training. And sadly, she passed away during COVID, because I would have loved to have known what she thought of what she was watching. Anyway, that's how I started, Les.
The strange man doing very funny moves. I've got the unfortunate that my next door neighbor does Krav Maga as well, so we both going and doing strange moves.
Garden. Brilliant.
So, what was the differences for you between how the Suzuki was teaching and a sorry, just lost the name. Second teacher, Terry ONeal. How could I forget that?
Well,
What was the differences?
Suzuki Sensei was quite an unusual man. Although you would say he was classically Wado Ryu, he wasn't sport Wado that evolved from a lot of his seniors that were teaching. Also, unlike Onoida Sensei, he had a very strong group of Japanese instructors around him within his group. And I got to train with a number of them, and a number of them weren't that interested in competing, although competition became a big thing with the Wado later on. Suzuki Sensei was very classically taught. He'd been taught by the founder of Wado, Otsuka Sensei, and his karate was his base karate had elements of jujutsu, which was the birthright to Wado anyway. Whereas ONeal Sensei did compete, but his competition was a day off for ONeal Sensei. His karate was very functional. The freak was that he would kick people rather than close them down and punish them. But his concepts of fundamental self-protection for outside were rooted very firmly in his training ethos. And he didn't, Whereas with Suzuki Sensei, his fundamental training, okay, although that was there, it was more related to self-development, okay. And I'm going to shy away from the word character development, because some of it was quite tough training. Okay, I didn't feel I was getting better at being able to defend myself until I really met ONeal Sensei. Although Alan Rushby, who I trained with, who did Shukokai, he was a rough and tough South Yorkshire miner. Okay, you know, he was well experienced of scuffles on the street. But again, he was also very purist in the way he taught Shukokai, and it was very much directed towards developing a skill set that would make you perform well in the modernized version of karate, which is where a lot of the Japanese main styles are going and still are today. Of course, if none of us had actually been involved in that, none of us who realized the whole thing needs to be turned on its head a little bit would have never have actually trained, because the whole thing would have been pushed into being a minority Japanese activity. Whereas, to a certain extent, it still is. If you get off a plane in Japan and ask them to direct you to the karate club, they'll just look at you blank. We seem to have this thing that with this idea we go to Japan and everybody does martial arts. They don't. It's only a very small percentage of the population. And they're still looked upon as being a bit kooky, and in some cases very right wing as well. So the main fundamental big differences I found was that it was in how the two people motivated you. Suzuki Sensei, it was, and I think this was because of the linguistic issue, was monkey say, monkey do, okay, and if you did it wrong, okay, it was you know, fundamentally press up, sit up, squat, thrust, okay, as a form of punishment. ONeal Sensei he's a great articulator. So, and he was extremely knowledgeable across not just his core Shotokan, but across a whole array of other martial arts due to the Fighting Arts magazine. So that meant you got a very educated view on stuff. He was also the ultimate practical combat man, you know. Everything was very focused in his training. Yeah, this is if you want to compete. This is if you want to take a man down quickly. And it was always, you need to engage first. There was never this, you know, karate ni sentanashi. Okay, there is no first attack. It was always, if a man shows intent, be first. Okay, so that whole ethos was very different to what I was doing with Suzuki Sensei. Suzuki Sensei was very much sticking to that. Okay, this is a defensive system. You wait till you're attacked, then you respond. ONeal Sensei, and I think it's for the years of his experience of working on nightclub doors in a pretty tough city, dealing with, you know, every form of human life, because it was a major port when he was working the doors. So you got sailors coming to the nightclubs from all over the world. So, you know, you got used to people carrying weapons as well, you know, because it was the norm in their culture. So his attitude towards it was a damn sight more practical. And even in his base training, even when he was like doing, okay, we're doing a Shotokan class, well, we'd spend an inordinate amount of time closing people down, using our elbows, taking people down. And years before it became popular, if you went to the ground, you had to have a set structure to work from there as well. So he was quite revolutionary, but I think his influences, if you got to train with him when he was teaching, you suddenly realized was that he wasn't teaching Shotokan. He was teaching ONeal Ryu, and ONeal Ryu worked for him. I remember being on a seminar where I was Izuki, and we did a whole hour and a half on closing people down, folding using your elbows, getting in close. And he was actually, you know, paraphrasing Gary Spies. And if you need to bite them, you know. The guy whose dojo was at the end of the class said, "Oh, that was fantastic. But tomorrow, can we just do some basic Shotokan, please?" And ONeal Sensei went off on one, which was quite entertaining as well, which is another whole story. Because the same guy asked ONeal Sensei about carrying weapons And ONeal Sensei back in the day said, well, you know, if I'm going into an environment where I know other people are going to carry weapons, I'm going to carry a weapon. And the guy said, "Oh, I can't imagine the amazing ONeal Sensei." You know, at the time Terry was like fifth or sixth down. Would ever think of carrying a weapon? And we were in this very, very expensive restaurant. And before I could stop Terry, he'd out of his pocket, he pulled out a balisong, but not your average little balisong. This thing folded out to like a sword and just stamped it in the middle of the table. And I'm like going, "Oh God, we're going to need to go." And this thing was quivering in the middle of the table. The whole restaurant went quiet. And I'm going, "Did you have to do that?" And he said, "No, but I needed to prove a point." Pulled the blade up, folded it back up, put it in his pocket, and went. But what he was trying to, I think it wasn't a piece of bravado. He was trying to explain to somebody that, you know, in an environment where people are carrying weapons, sometimes you would need a leveler. And when violence, people are prepared to commit the most horrendous forms of violence, you know, this bit of flesh and bone that we're walking around with, okay, he's only going to protect you so far, you know. And I think that was the issue with lots of martial arts practice at a period of time. They believed the fact that they were doing karate and they were working towards a black belt, they were like wrapping themselves in some, you know, some coat of that is going to totally protect them. There was no realization of the real facts of violence, and to a certain extent, there still isn't. You know, you see clubs. There are some very large clubs of all sorts of different martial arts. And people think because they're doing that, they're able to deal with violence when it happens. Well, unless there is some form of mental condition that's going with your training and some proper preparation for it, it won't. You'll be fitter, faster, stronger. And that was one of the things I realized when I first went to Japan. I went to the JKA and I was getting fitter, faster, stronger at what they were doing. And it was fun and I enjoyed it. But I looked around me and thought, this has not been arrogant. I looked around at some of these guys, you know, I'm a big guy. And I looked around and thought, none of these guys have ever had a real fight. If it really hit the fan, okay, I reckon most of them I could have battered very, very quickly. There was one or two where you went, "Yeah, I don't want to get into a tussle with you. I may be twice your body weight, but you're just dangerous." So the likes of Mikio Yahara, you knew, because he would be tooled up. You knew if it kicked off, he would do everything to put you in hospital he possibly could. But you'd look at some of the others and go, "Nah." Now it's funny. I was doing stuff for the magazine at the time, and I got asked to go and interview Oyama Sensei. And everybody said, "Oh, you mustn't go there. They brutalize you." And I went to Oyama Sensei's dojo, and I was made extremely welcome. Um, the training was tough, but you know, the guys there was an honesty there. You know, they'd gone through what didn't work and what did work. Okay. So I actually enjoyed my training. I went back several times to train, even after I'd conducted the interview. Was never meant to give up everything else I did, was never told everybody else was wrong. Okay. Was just welcomed and put your gear on and train. Did I get, kicked a few times in places I didn't expect to kick? Yeah, so what? Okay. It made my karate stronger. And I think that's the other problem we've got, is that cross-fertilization of ideas and concepts is now getting, the doors are getting closer and closer. You're getting people that won't train outside their comfort zone. They won't go and train with another group. And it's also happening from people who've never done karate. They're getting brainwashed. Oh, well, this system's the only system that works. Well, that's bull. It's an individual thing. It's a human thing. I've met people who were fantastic boxers, and outside they've got absolutely wasted. Then I've met people who've never trained at all, who are absolute monsters, because all they'd ever done is relate to real violence outside. So they had that capability of dealing with it. Did they look good when they did it? No. Were they effective? Sure they were. And I think that's the big problem we have with that understanding difference between styles and individuals. It is an individual journey, And in true honesty, that's what the Japanese were going on about. So if that concept of shuhare is to be held up, is we accept a tradition, we make a tradition work, and we become our own damn tradition because it's got to work for us as an individual. And then what happens next is you get a group of people that want to train with you, and there's a little bit of hero worship going on, and you become their role model until they've got to their tradition of their own. Because the ultimate aim of any good instructor is to be able to give people the ability to deal with the crap that life throws at them and push them out the door. And if you look at what the things that you're doing with the karate for mental health and raising funds for that, is I think a lot of people's problems that they get is that they don't have that strength to be able to do that. And I think as instructors, it's not always about punching and kicking people. It's about giving people emotional strength. And that is a good byproduct to training. Konishi Sensei, who became my big mentor when I went to Japan, said something. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase, which is exactly what he said. That martial arts is supposed to improve people's characters and make them better people, but it often doesn't. And he was absolutely right. But I think as instructors, we have a responsibility. That responsibility is irrelevant of styles or where you came from, is to get people into that mindset of being emotionally strong to deal with stuff. That's the real big gig we should be doing.
Yeah, it is definitely. Karate likes to throw that banner: honor, diligence, respect. But you got so many examples of quite opposite, especially when people start getting into higher levels of organizations and all the.
Power corrupts, and very few people can handle power. Okay, and in essence, if you look at the human race, it's that somebody gets into those power positions, and they still have the frailties that they had. Those frailties will become the bias of their existence, which is really dangerous. And I'm not going to talk today about the recent big thing that's happened within the karate world with a very senior karateka. He was showing that behavior many years ago. What is more damning is that because of the bureaucracy that is built around these large groups, it became everybody was like ignoring it or saying, it's something that we have to live with. No, it isn't. We wouldn't live with it if it was a work colleague. We wouldn't live with it if it was a school teacher. Okay. And that is another problem with martial arts. It's this pedestal stuff. I know this conversation's gone on before where people said, about people calling you sensei. I hate it outside the dojo. And if people do it, I'll pull them, especially if they're a logo and say, no, my name's Simon. That's the name my mother gave me. I don't particularly like it, but please call me it. All right. When we're in the dojo, it's a structure, okay, that we work with because that's the way I've decided to train. It's like, I could do my karate without my gi on, absolutely. But I like putting the gi on. It's psychologically good for me. Yeah. But people say to me, oh, yeah, well, you've got to always wear your gi. No, you haven't. I said, some of the greatest karate masters of the past never wore gis. Chojo Miyagi, when he passed away, they found a gi in a room, all folded up and neatly sort of they presented him. He never wore a gi. He trained in his daily clothes because and that was one of the reasons what attracted me about Konishi Sensei, because both him and Yamazaki, every now and again, we just train in our everyday clothes. And he said to me, well, you're not going to be wearing your gi. Your gi is symbolic, and it allows you to come and train and not damage your daily clothes. But every now and again, you should train in them. And I like that type of ethos. And that was one of the reasons I switched from. For many years, I was juggling two groups, basically because of this giri, this obligation that I had to my sensei, to Onoida Sensei. And then eventually the group I was involved with, I could see some of the dysfunctional behavior. And I separated myself from it completely. And then by the time Onoida Sensei passed away, that was it. That was like saying, here's the cutoff. I'm now going to go and do what I always wanted to do and what I was happy doing. Because Kenichi to me was like my Mr. Miyagi. He literally was. He was very like that as well. He had the fantastic sense of humor, but he was also one of these people that he'd looked at us arriving Westerners and gone, "Oh, how do I deal with them?" Went straight and enrolled himself in a boxing school, then became one of the top boxing coaches in the country, coached some of the first really good lightweight boxers, okay, that actually started winning. And then incorporated some of that into his training. And the karate purists were going, "You can't do that." And going, "Well, why can't I do it?" Okay, because if they're going to deal with a Westerner, okay, they're going to need to know how a Westerner moves. Okay, and so his drift away from the traditional pushed him into the background, and a couple of other things. He was the first person to use the words karate jutsu, and then eventually he dropped that completely and just went back to the old adage of kurute or juste. Although I did have a very funny conversation with him about Japan karate do ryobukai. I said, "Well, we're not doing karate do. Why do you?" And he looked at me and said, "Oh, this is. If I not use karate do, government does not give me money. If I use karate do, government pays, helps with the rent." I was, "Oh, get that. I like that. That makes sense." So that, honestly, I think is the thing that I'm trying to say, is that a lot of people in the martial arts become clouded with a level of misunderstanding about why they're training. And it either becomes clouded by money or it becomes clouded by power, and that power corrupts. It corrupts at all levels. Even, because I meet people. I'm still training. I still go out and train every day. Okay, yeah, I'm 60 odd years of age. I'm not in the great shape as I was when I was in my 20s. So I often meet people who are quite senior, the same age as me, and they're not really training. They're putting a gi on, okay, but they're not really training, and that to me is wrong. Yeah, okay. I have injuries that I've collected over the years, but it doesn't stop me from doing stuff and physically doing stuff. And I think it's wrong if I'm going to stand in front of a class and ask them to do something. Okay, I've got to be able to do it myself. Yeah. Even if it's kicking Jodan, I can still kick Jodan. People are going to me. Some of my peers are going, "I don't kick Jodan." And I'm going, "Why?" The reason is because they stopped training 10 years ago. They're not stretching properly. Okay. But you'll get them, "Well, you don't really need it." So you might. What if you're laid on your back and you want to use your feet? Okay. You still want to be practicing stuff that gives you. I actually quite like kicking Jodan as well. I have to admit it. So to all my, reality combat people, if you don't think it works, I've dropped a couple of people with Jodan Mawashigeris, okay, when I least expected it. It just came out naturally.
I think that's the thing, that if you like something. I had a friend who never trained, and he was dropping people with the Marshi Jordan because he was tall and very flexible, and he liked it. He's seen it on a movie somewhere, and they said, "Oh, I like that," and he was dropping people down without any training. So I think it's very, like you said earlier, individual, right?
It
It's
is.
not what is karate; it's what you can do with karate.
Yeah. It is an individual journey. And I think you look at us now, and I like the fact that I associate with people that somebody once said to me, he said, when I look at some of the people, the Three Amigos, it's like watching the cast of One Flew Out the Cuckoo's Nest. Said, you're all very different. I said, "Yeah." "Yeah, you get on?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Because I like the differences. I like to hear people's ideas and thoughts. And what works for some people doesn't work for other people. And you may be, coming up with a student struggling with something, and you may be struggling in helping them. Okay. And then one of your colleagues comes and said, "Have you ever thought of doing this? Have you ever thought of," and you go, "You're right." And I've never been that. If it's not come from me, it's not of any value, and that was drilled into me from ONeal Sensei from an early age. When we did the Fighting Arts magazine, I'd meet people from every form of fighting system you could imagine. Okay, and he was always like an open book himself. I remember once the team had gone down to Crystal Palace to compete, and there was Lajos Jacobs, who's this mad Polish guy. Okay, don't be offended. All right, who taught Mongolian kung fu, totally made it up, and he was teaching in the room. Me and Terry went and trained with him while we were supposed to be waiting to compete. We had a great time, and we got talking to him afterwards and said, "This isn't really kung fu." No, he says it's kickboxing. He says, but when I first started, he said, I'd done karate. If I'd come out here and just said kickboxing, I wouldn't have got any members because kung fu was the word that was pulling people in. He was dead honest about it. And I'm like, yeah, you'll do for me, Lajos. And he eventually got the gig for teaching Roger Moore in one of the Bond movies, Roger Moore's first Bond movie. Okay. You know, some people have called him a complete charlatan, but he actually produced some really good fighters. And as you said, he had people who got a natural skill set for something, okay, and he helped them do it better. What's wrong with that? You know, we get hung up on that purist concept a little bit, and I see it today. You know, it's well, my grade's been given to me by such and such, comes from such and such, and you're going, yeah, you're just on the bandwagon, you're just on the treadmill, okay, of that group. Okay, and unless if you have value in that group, that's your business. Okay, but don't think it's superior to somebody over here who's doing something completely different and doesn't care about grades. They're just getting on with the training. Horses for courses, as they say.
So what is the main difference in your opinion from Shindo Jinen Ryu you're doing
Yeah.
versus the Shotokan and other traditional Japanese karate styles?
Shindo Jinin Ryu, if you actually translate it literally, we sound like a religious cult. It sounds like heavenly, godly ways, but that's because it's lost in translation. What Kunishi wanted was natural. And he'd looked at a lot of the karate and he said it was moving away from its source and becoming very unnatural. And some of the body movement, he was a bone setter by occupation, yeah? And he'd looked at people's body movement. He thought some of the things that were going off would actually damage the body. So that was his first perspective. Then the other thing was that his system included not just upright stuff, but it went to the ground. It had elements of aiki in it. Lots of things that people are trying to do today. He'd already incorporated in it, but it wasn't that they'd been influenced by other people. He'd taken influences from Yeshiba, from Kenwa Mabuni, from Funakoshi, but his main influence was actually Choki Motobu. And I had lots of conversations about that relationship between him and Motobu. And I think Motobu influenced him psychologically about how he should approach his martial arts. He was an experienced jujitsu practitioner, which a lot of that first generation, or we call first generation, although people don't realize that they weren't the first people teaching karate in mainland Japan. There'd been others. And we also get this concept that there was nothing like karate in mainland Japan. There was. Okay, so there was striking systems that were very similar. They didn't have that elusive thing called kata, but they had ryopo, they had partner drills and stuff like that. And we still maintain some of those. So we still have some of the ryopo. We still have a lot of two-man work, which is more related to what Motobu's original teaching. We still have heavy weapons, and we do odd things like, so most people call this action soto uriuke, yeah? So soto uriuke to us goes the other way because it's the same movement with a bow. Okay, so there's some oddities like that. So the naming convention's a little bit different for some of the techniques, but also how we apply stuff. It's people would say we're kata-centric. We're not. We're principle-centric. So we do have this when I first joined the group many years ago, there was stacks of kata. I go, okay, I'm never going to learn all this lot. And it was interesting. Yamazaki took me to one side and says, "You're not supposed to. You need to find the kata that suits you emotionally, physically, and mentally, that works for you. Then work with those. Okay, and make sure you can make it applicable to you, because the whole idea of the bunkai oyo henka principle was that you get application, you break it down. That's your oyo. That's your analyzing of it. Then you come up with your variables that work for you, and then you should work on the variables, because you're never going to remember the stuff, because it's never been, as you well know, move 12 from kata number 6 for this type of attack.
Yeah.
Because you'll get absolutely mullered. The idea is to do loads of application, so you start to respond naturally. And that's what Kanishi's gig was about, was that he wanted a natural response. So you walk into the whole concept of the belt. You walk into the dojo, you wear a white belt, eventually gets to black belt wears back to white, and you've done this circle of life. He said your training should be always on that concept of returning to being a natural. It's part of your natural body movement. If it's unnatural, you won't do it. And you will, you can learn as much application as you like, but unless you're actually pressure testing it and going, okay, this is how I'm going to respond for this particular session. Okay, what are the variables I'm likely to face? Then I test the variables and I keep doing it. And you do the same with the weapon stuff, and you relate the weapons to your empty hand and your empty hand to your weapons, because you haven't got time to learn 3 different bloody systems. Okay, and then you've got to have you as long as the underlying principles of understanding about impact transitioning, okay, are in everything that you do, then you're actually training principles to make you more effective. Then the other stuff is about, how do I improve my reaction? My flinch reaction time has got to be improved. And he had all of this, and he was in the training where I'd been going to the JK, and I was getting fitter, faster, stronger, but I was being marched up and down. But there was none of this detail that was going to make me more comprehensive as a martial artist. So at a very superficial level, I can look at Shindo Jinryu and go, oh yeah, there's that kata, there's that kata. But it's the way that it was taught. I'd never sat down in the JKA or any of the other major Japanese groups and I'd heard the word bunkai, but I'd never heard the word oyo henka or bunkai henka. So you're going straight from breaking down straight to a variable. That whole process of study was sort of frowned upon. And doing it against techniques of the other thing, which was with Kanishi, was we did very little against karate techniques. It was more like somebody doing right cross, uppercut, grabbing you, okay, trying to kick your shins, okay, dragging you to the floor and stuff. And that was the big difference. Whereas I was doing bunkai, but it was always done against oyazuki, gyakuzuki, maigiri, mawashigiri, and some of the application didn't make sense, because application of movement happens through movement, not at the end of the movement. As you well know, when you're applying stuff, that the minute you stand still, you're a target.
Yeah, I say that to my students, that the kata lives in transitions. It's not
That's it.
on the
That's
end
good.
of it, it's in transitions.
Correct. And that's that was the 2 big differences. Now, do I see stuff that I'm doing, that the Shindo Jinryu appearing in Shotokan groups now? I do. And it's interesting, some of the people that were very much against, in the early days, the stuff I was teaching, because I like an idiot, I came back from Japan, a young man, and I was telling people, you're not really doing karate. You do know that, don't you? You're not really doing effective karate. You're doing a game based on it. And of course, being a snotty little second dan, okay, nobody would listen to me, because of this structured hierarchical thing, and competition was still very much at the forefront. And now I see some of those people that are now starting to change their ideas, but they haven't quite got the concept, because they're not prepared to go and train with people who know it, because it's can't if it's not invented in these four walls, it's not real, and that's wrong. I mean, I look at all sorts of stuff every day, all sorts of stuff. So that I think one of the greatest things that's happened to martial arts, and one of the worst things, is the internet.
Definitely.
Because you can see all sorts of bunkum on there, but there's also some great resource stuff on there. And I think now I've got to the age where I have enough knowledge to go, yeah, and enough experience to go, that'll get you killed. But I'm not tempted like the rest of them to go, that doesn't work, that'll get you killed. Okay. What's the point?
I think the problem is that people, and I've got that a lot on internet when I'm posting stuff, that,
Oh,
oh,
I've
that wouldn't
seen it.
work. Yeah, but not everything. People don't understand that I'm not training for self-defense, right? I've got my sets for self-defense. That's mine. That's what I'm using. I've been tested. I know it works for me. But my club is about mental health, uh, cultural, you know, keeping in a growing manner. And sometimes we do stuff which never gonna work, but it's fun.
Yeah,
And people they cannot kind of disengage from that their one way of looking, and it's, oh, if it doesn't fit my brackets, it's crap.
yeah. And
Uh,
sadly, there's loads of that going on, and I try and avoid it like the plague. Every now and again, something silly comes up, and I go, and then I realise I should have kept my mouth shut and just let it go. And that's an age thing. So today, I think we're spoiled. Back in the days when I started, resource, you were really limited. I've got 3 rooms full of books. Okay, and I'd be scouring all over the place for stuff. Martial arts on the terrestrial TV. Okay, if you got an episode of Kung Fu, or you were lucky, and we would be all glued to it. And now we look back at it and go, do you know that was the biggest bit of bunkum I've ever watched in my life? But the philosophy behind it was really nice. And now it's coming at you from every angle. If you turn on the TV, there will be at least martial arts being taught at any particular time during the day, or demonstrated, and at least one channel, maybe more. And I think that's the world has moved on dramatically. The problem is that because of that accessibility, people think it's an instant fix. When you actually train people and say, well, look, if you're going to train in martial arts, understand what your end game is, what you want out of it, okay, and then find an instructor that can help you get to that end game. Okay, you may need to you if you come into it and people go like, oh, I just want to be able to look after myself. Okay, so yeah, most people who take up any martial art, that's their core. But what else do you want out of it? I know karate groups. One of my dojos is a beer club with a karate problem. Okay, they meet
Love
once.
it.
They meet once a week. They train for 2 hours, and then they go to the pub for a beer. Okay, and so I call them, it's a beer club with a karate problem. And I join them, and they train hard, but the ultimate aim is that socialization that they're going to do at the end. Okay. And you're going, well, that's wrong. And we're, no, it isn't. The average age of these guys is 60. They all live in a very nice area. The chances of getting involved in any real violence, very slim. They do the exercise, and then I said, and they enjoy doing it. Okay, and they don't want to go play golf. They don't want to, they don't want to go play badminton, which would be equally as beneficial to them. They want to do martial arts. Okay, and they're getting a benefit out of it. And they're quite a caring little group. They all know about each other's issues and problems and look after each other. To me, that's a great social thing. That's a very positive social thing. There's a couple of them are widowers. They're on their own. It's their only social interaction. Yeah. And we know that loneliness is one of the worst things anybody can suffer as a human being. We realized that during the pandemic, because we were all, I can cope with being on my own. And we suddenly realized we can't. We're actually quite gregarious, even if it's just going to the local shop and talking to the guy behind the counter. Okay.
Yeah.
we like that interaction. We're tribal.
So as we on the subject of mental health, what would you say what was the impact of karate on your mental health?
I've had quite an interesting working life, and I've had to deal with some quite extremes. And I think if it hadn't been for the fact that I was able to get in the dojo sometimes and isolate myself from some of the stuff I was having to live with on a working basis, I think I would have had a lot more severe problems in my life. Karate has always been a great leveler to me because it's the one place that I can go and for a period of time forget about some of the stuff I'm having to deal with outside of karate. The other thing is, it's any place you can put a white suit on, scream the place down, and nobody's going to think there's something mentally wrong with you. So it was that. I think the strength, it's given me great strength to face lots of things in life because one of the things that is a positive out of martial arts training is that it does get you used to a little bit of pain physically and emotionally. And the extremes of testing helps you cope with that. So that's one of the benefits, but it's just the generic training. Okay. And I think that emotional strength it's helped with dramatically. Now, has it made me a cold fish? No. I will cry at the most unbelievable things. What it's helped me be is actually be a stronger emotional being. And I think the fact is that I do get emotional and I can deal with it. And then I'm not this stoic piece of cold rock. I think has made me a better human being because I came from a period of time where men didn't cry, men didn't express their emotions. They were completely rock hard all the time. And you knew somewhere that they were actually breaking down. I saw, my father and my grandfather. My grandfather had lived through 2 wars. My father had lived through, 1 war, and had actually, you could see the damage that had been done. Okay, and they were bottling it all up. Yeah. Now, some of the behavioural stuff that neither my father or grandfather were heavy. Well, my grandfather did like a drink, but neither of them were the heavy drinkers, which is normally one of the first signs. But there was that time when I knew there was an element of PTSD in their lives going on because they would switch off. You know, and I think from training martial arts that helped them cope with some of the problems that they'd had. But certainly with me, I think it's made me I don't like using the word strong. I think it's made me a more emotional human being that I can deal with my emotions and I'm not afraid of expressing my emotions. Oh, the other thing is because I like hug people, I like to tell people, hey, listen, you're going to be okay. I care about you. And I think the dojo should be a place where people care about each other. As that sometimes it does need to be a little bit of an intense place. But I do think that we have a very important part to play in society. Because it is an unusual activity. People going in a room and practicing controlled violence. Okay, and then leaving that room and going back into society. Okay, it's got to have positive byproducts. Okay, and the positive byproducts, it should strengthen you emotionally, but you've also got to have the right instructor because what you will get in most dojos is most people are teaching, they'll either go to a place and they're being drilled. Well, they might as well go to an aerobics class because the view from the back of an aerobics class is far better than the view from the back of a karate class. So you might as well go and do that. I think where you have to face yourself sometimes and ask yourself questions about your own abilities is important as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think that the support group is very important within martial arts. And like you said, it is all due to a right teacher.
Yeah.
You might have a best group, and if the teacher gonna be a abusive one, it's not gonna be anything good from it.
No, and we've seen that. I've seen that many a times. I've seen teachers who are bullies, teachers that well, I can remember being in America once and meeting a Korean teacher who told me, when I look in here, every one of them has a dollar sign above their head. And I thought I just switched off. I just walked out. And he was right in his head. That was it. He was a business to him, pure business. Didn't want to socialize with it. He couldn't understand why he couldn't keep students. And he couldn't understand why people left. And I've also been at places where the instructor just brutalizes people for his own self-gain. That says there's something seriously wrong. You know, I mean, I will demonstrate stuff, but if somebody comes to me and says, I've got this injury, and I say, okay, we need to find a way you can train around that. Yeah, not on it. And as you get older, you collect a group of students with hip problems, knee problems, shoulder problems, you know. So you have to modify your training. And so I've ran a dojo where there was a lot of elite athletes, okay, and I hated it because I was dealing with a group of blooming divas that needed pampering to all the time, okay, and if things weren't exactly right that day, you'd get divish behavior. Whereas now I teach, okay, and I actually enjoy teaching, but I teach amongst people who I'm not looking for the perfect athlete. I'm looking for somebody who's enjoying what they're doing and getting some overall benefit. And the overall benefit is not being able to go and punch somebody's lights out. You know, any idiot can do that. You're going to go stand in any town centre on a Friday night, and you can see it happening. You know, it's sometimes it's that ability of people to come into the dojo, forget everything else that's going off around them for a couple of hours, okay, and enjoy themselves. Because I think that's the other thing as well. You know, you get people who are so stoic in the dojo going, do you know, that's not the Okinawan way. And it certainly was not Kanishi's way. Okay. He was more happy that you were smiling. Because he once said something to me, which has stuck with me ever. He said, if people are happy, they learn and they absorb stuff. Okay. If they feel bad, they won't. And it's true when you look at your kids, you know, your kids go to school and they'll have a subject that they're struggling with like crazy. And, you know, one of my daughters was not very mathematically minded, and we had a real problem. And I went and watched one of the classes, and I realized the problem wasn't my daughter, was the teacher. Teacher just wanted to teach the syllabus. Okay. So we got to this tutor, and this tutor related everything in that in the mathematical syllabus to stuff that my daughter would understand. Guess what? She manages to pass the maths exam. You know, and I think that's the problem with lots of things. You know, we don't realize we're looking at a group of individuals with different abilities. That's one of my bugbears when doing big seminars. I go in seminars and I like to give something to everybody. Okay, look at everybody individually and go, no, that's not. You need to change this. You need to do that. And I think it's difficult on big seminars. That's why I think, you know, I used to go to seminars years ago, and Kanazawa Sensei would come over and get invited to go. And you realize when he stood there with a mic on that I'm just in the room with him. I'm not actually getting any benefit from this at all.
Yeah, I don't like all those seminars because they say, oh, high grade, you know, black belt seminars, and you're doing Chokutsuki, Maigeri, and well, I can do that at home, not paying $70 for being in the room with a person who I barely see from my last row.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I'd probably get more benefit by watching them on YouTube.
Because you can see precisely what he's doing, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I've stayed away from that for many years. I mean, our association does some gashakus, and they break up into smaller groups, which I really like. Yeah. And the thing that's a bit crazy at the end of them, the group gets to critique your class, which is really good fun, because that's the way we improve, you know. And I think that I went on a big event in Okinawa a few years ago. It was, in fact, last time I saw Kanazawa Sensei, he was there, but he was fading. And it was the Higona Sensei's big Buddha sign in Okinawa. This place was. I've never seen so many karateka in the one place, and I'm thinking, do you know, if I'm just going to get marched up and down for the next 5 days, I'm going to do my nut. And what they did was really clever. They divided it, the whole group, into smaller groups, and the classes became quite intense. And it was well worth attending because of that. Yeah. And we've got a lot of individual attention, which was also good as well, which I really enjoyed. And Okinawa's not a big place, so. But when they used to do those Buddha events, there's a lot of people there from all over the world. But the way it was done is the way that you would actually get some benefit from, and I think that's critical, really critical.
So you've been both in Okinawa and in Japan. What was the differences between training?
So, well, fundamentally, you can put it into the Japanese, although the Okinawans are changing now because they've realized karate is a very big business, and there were the poor relations for a period of time. The Japanese got onto it a lot earlier, but still, the fundamental difference is the type of training. You go to mainland Japan, you go to any of the big groups, you're going to do a lot of kihon drilling. Doesn't happen in Okinawa so much. There's a lot more partner work. They do very little kihon drilling at all. You might do it as part of a warm-up. That's it. Then done. Then we're on to doing some constructive partner work or working on kata application. The kata centricness of Okinawan karate is more prolific because what's happened with the modernization or mainland Japanese karate, the drive was to develop a collegiate competitive arena. Because if you go back far enough, and it's not that far, if you go back to the early evolution of karate in mainland Japan, it was going to get pushed to one side. It was not a mainland Japanese martial art. And it was anti-establishment. And somebody had told Funakoshi very early on, if you don't get this into the universities, okay, and into students practicing it, it won't evolve. And it was at Kinishi's dojo at K University that he was approached, and he enabled Funakoshi to teach. And when I asked Kenichi about it, I said, what happened then? He says, and he was dead honest, he said, racism. He says, the Okinawans were treated as a second-class race. He says, and until their style, they gave a style name to what they were doing and got accepted by the mainstream, it was not going to go anywhere. And he enabled that for them to happen. So if you look at who the real mover and shaker was of Okinawan karate during the 20s and 30s, it was Yashiro Kenichi, because he was the man that enabled them to register their styles, give them a name, and establish themselves within the college system, the academics. Now, it was during that period of time, there was huge militarization going on in Japan that impacted how karate was taught. Post the war, karate was promoted as a sporting system, the true birth of karate do, and there was no interest, in some of the stuff that had gone off in the past. Now, and it's interesting, and your clue is if you look at the development of the JKA, none of Funakoshi's first students, or very few of them, because I don't classify as Nakayama as being a direct student of Funakoshi's, actually stayed with Nakayama. They all went and did their own thing. So you got the birth of our group, Shindo Jininru, Shito Ryu, Wado Ryu, Oyama Sensei's Kokushinkai. Okay, they all went off that first generation and did their own thing, because to a certain amount, some of them were very much tied to being a functional system for real combat still. Whereas some of the others, what was going off with Nakayama Sensei's group, they were developing a that idea that karate do was going to become like judo. That Jigoro Kano was a great statesman, and if you actually look into him as his life, he was quite an interesting character because he was surrounded by some pretty thuggish individuals who were politically very right wing. Some of them were fighting regular outside on the street. I mean, the classic example is Niwa's groundwork. He wanted to take it out of judo completely, but it is his students, his toughy students. No, we need to keep it in because we need to have something if we go to the ground. But ultimately, Jigoro Kano wanted to give a modernization of culturally something that was born out of battlefield training. And the same thing was happening to karate from a different perspective. Because karate, if you look at it really, it's guerrilla warfare. It was anti-establishment. So it was never designed for the battlefield condition. It was designed for personal protection. Okay, that's where its origins. And if you go even further back, you suddenly start to realize that the movement and some of the stuff that was taught around it was also about the personal protection, about keeping yourself your body in a condition that you survived other things, other threats like major illnesses and plague and famine and stuff like that. Whereas by the time the universities got hold of it, they wanted to develop a dynamic competitive sport, and that's what they did, and that's what was sold to us. Okay.
Do you think that's why the bunkai was removed? Because it seems to be starting from Funakoshi that people start forgetting to do a normal kind of grappling arts and move to long distance punching. And I think I'm not sure how true that is, but it was more of with the Jigo Funakoshi, all the changes and pushing towards the long stances and stuff.
I think the sports scientist faculty at Keio, Hakuda, and Takashoku, okay, were developing what they thought was a dynamic sport. It was, I spoke to Nakayama Sensei once about it, and he actually said, he was very honest. This is game based on, not old style, not kurute. This is a game based on that. And he was absolutely right. He said, you look at kendo, for the life of me, two blokes just charging each other, bashing each other with some tied together bamboo looks nothing like proper kenjutsu. Okay, which was designed to draw, cut, okay, get rid of the blood as quickly as possible, okay, and make sure your blade is in a decent condition to kill somebody. We have this impression that samurai swords last forever. They don't. This is why there were so many sword makers, because one good old battle, your sword was thrown, it was done, it was useless. This is why you get a metal detector, go over some of the old battlegrounds in Japan, you keep finding bits of them. So I think you're absolutely, you're right. I think the extraction of proper application was done for the pure simple reason that wasn't what they were doing. They wanted to win the next university championships. They wanted people who understood the dynamics, okay, that work for that competition arena. Yeah, it's like once you put something into a competitive format, there's certain things that you have to do to it to make it effective for that format. And of course, then you look at the kata. You read any of the old masters, the way we're performing kata, or the way kata is being made to perform, doesn't bear any resemblance to what it was designed for. Okay, so it was every fighting system has some form of sequence training, whether it be 5 or 6 moves with a partner, or whether it's it's a full blown 100 and odd move kata. But that sequence training has got to have some semblance in giving you application that you're going to work on. All right. And what actually happened was it became like a gymnastic floor performance. Okay. And if you ask most of those people doing it, they knew how to do the performance very well. But if you asked them what they were doing, they couldn't tell you. And I'd go to Japan and I'd see fantastic performances of the kata that bore no semblance to reality. And I'd ask them, I said, what's that movement for? And they just look at me blank. because they didn't know. And of course, that was accentuated by the early people that left Japan to come out and teach. They were 20-year-old kids, not that long out of university, okay, who'd never been in a fight in their life. And then they're coming over and teaching a dynamic fighting system. No, they weren't. They were teaching university sport karate. And it's still going on now. I see it now. I look on the internet and there's some young kid who's, he can hardly grow fur on his face, fresh out of university from Japan, and they're now heralding him as some great, martial artist. He's not. He's a very good sport karate person. Okay, he's won a few championships, and that's why you train, because that's what you want to do. But if you think what he's doing, he's going to save you from getting a beating or understand the kata for application. No, because you'll be doing stuff against somebody attacking with a maigiri or an oizuki. In all the years I've dealt with real violence, I've only ever been attacked twice with people doing karate techniques. Okay. Only and it was quite interesting when it did happen, because one of them bowed, did Gaiden Barra and tried to hit me with Oizuki. Okay. And so it was just like being in a class. But I think we've now got a realization going on, because we can look at that. I can look at that and enjoy it. Okay. But when you get a world champion who wins by being knocked over, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't, to me, a world champion should have been the guy who stood up, who'd done the knocking over. And I think that's where there's a level of dishonesty coming to it, because that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, definitely there's a problem with that, and kind of I thought it's gonna be a good promotion for karate, but it turns up the other way.
Yeah, he did the complete reverse. We've probably got better promotion from the Shogun movie. Then you do, because then you get people who are like me. We become Japanologists. We also like the culture. We like other bits of the culture as well, not just the martial arts. And I think things like the movies will bring a percentage of people into the martial arts like that. Okay. But the World Karate Federation World Championships did more harm.
I mean,
because you put it up there, okay, and then you go and at a time when we have cage fighting at the MMA stuff, the UFC stuff at the other end of the scale, yeah, and it doesn't look good for karate at all. But has the world got space for them both? Yes. But as long as it's educating people in the middle and people who come into, because it amazes me, since the early 70s and late 60s, when Asian martial arts really boomed, okay, you still have people who are enrolling in groups, okay, supposedly they want to learn self-defense, okay, but they're still enrolling in groups that that's not what you're going to get taught. Okay.
Yeah, that is the dishonesty on karate part, and I can't remember when I last time used self-defense in my advertising. I don't do much advertising, but wherever I posting, I never use self-defense because that's not what I teach. And I believe that people walking into the dojo should have a clarity and informed choice why they want to do it.
Yeah. Well, there was a stage, and I think like lots of groups during the big boom years, where we'd advertise in the local newspaper and you'd get 80 people turn up. Within 10 weeks, you'd be down to 10. Those days are no longer there. So when people phone me up now and say, I've seen a post, I'd like to come and do martial arts with you. So you get more these days. They've done something else. So I've done such and such, and I've seen that, and I'd like to go what you're doing. Okay, well, come down and have a natter. What? Yeah, come down and talk to me. So I now talk to people before they start. And some of my students go, why are you turning around? Because this isn't what they want to do.
Exactly.
I don't want to waste their time or their money. They want to go they really want to go and do Tai Chi. Oh, and this person over here, they really want to, do Muay Thai. Okay. They don't want to do what I'm doing. And I think we as instructors have a responsibility to have those dialogues. Again, yeah, I think you and I can work together. This will work for us, or be that honest to go, no, you need to go to such and such. But the other problem is the commercialization of martial arts has meant there are people doing this, and their ultimate aim is not you; it's paying their mortgage. You know. Now, I don't mind people earning money from martial arts. Okay, I think that but I think you need to be fundamentally honest with people. Okay, about what you are teaching and if it will actually benefit them and if it's really what they want. And you only get that from talking to people. Okay, and I think that's a problem with some instructors. They get wrapped up with their own persona, their own ego. Okay, and don't have that conversation. And I don't think martial arts overcomes people's egos. It doesn't. I think in many cases it makes it worse. I think us as people need to be more human. We need to relate to people. I'll give you a classic example. The other night, I was teaching a club at our main Hombu in Nottingham. There was a group of kids outside causing absolute mayhem. So I went out, okay, and they were doing all the shouting, kicking, and doing kicks and stuff. And I said, "You ever thought of doing martial arts, any of you lot?" Okay, I said, "The reason I've come out," I says, "there's this. If any of you fall off the wall out here, that's my fault. So I don't want you running around it because it's dangerous." And I had a conversation with them. Okay, and I get to talk to these kids, and you sort of realise that by talking to them, instead of going out and shouting at them, start to understand what they want to do. One of them did actually want to come and train, but was a bit scared. Brought all her friends with her to boost her confidence, and then it because they didn't know how to approach anybody. And I think that's the other thing. I think instructors need to be more approachable instead of playing that aloof, isolated individuals. I like talking to people, okay, and trying to find out really why they took up martial arts. I ask them all the time, "Why are you doing this thing? Do you think we're better at knitting?"
Speaking of people, you've been interviewing people. You've been with many senseis. Who made the biggest impression on you and why?
Well, that's a good question. It's a difficult question. Um,
I'm sure there's different reasons for different people are impressed. We always have a different approach to people, and
there were certain people I wish I'd never met who ONeal Sensei once said something to me. When he got into the acting business, he ended up meeting quite a few people who was his heroes, on the big screen. And he said, my biggest fear was meeting them, and they turned out not to be particularly nice. And he said that happened on lucky enough, he said, he met 3 of his biggest movie heroes, and they turned out to be quite nice people, and he got on with them. I have met a number of very senior martial artists over these people that were put up as, and some of them still are, as great accolades, and they weren't particularly nice people, and they weren't that great an individual. But then I've met others that have left huge impression in me. So sadly, Kyoshi Yamazaki Sensei, who passed away last year, when I first met him, he hadn't done the Conan movies with Arnold and stuff by then. But I'd never met such a humble man coming from that tradition. I've been used to quite a few senior Japanese karateka. Okay, you'd interview them and you'd find out that they were staying in 5-star hotels. They were demanded huge amounts of money up front. He'd come and teach. He'd sleep on my couch with my dog. And often I'd come in and the dog would be on the couch and he'd be on the floor. And after every course we did, he'd go, "Have you paid the rent for the hall? Okay. Have you covered for this?" Before he would accept his payment, And so his humbleness always impressed me. And as a human being, he was a great teacher. And his insight into people's characters. And I remember him once after a downgrade, he turned around and said, he said, most of these you see who've now got their downgrade, it will be the biggest mistake we've ever done, giving them a black belt. He says, not because they physically can't do it, he says, mentally, they can't hack it. It goes to their head. And he was right. So he had a big impression on me. And it was often people that out the mainstream that, I can talk about great martial artists that are well known, but I met some people that were not so well known, who also were pretty impressive individuals as martial artists. One of them was a Tai Chi instructor called Earl Montague. Okay, big hippie-looking guy with long hair. Okay, the most unlikely Tai Chi instructor you could ever imagine. Very impressive human being. An hour in his company, you were completely enthralled. He was not just a good communicator, but you could see the essence of him as a person. He was a man that cared, and he cared about his students' welfare. And he cared about the most oddest things you'd see around you. But if I look at some of the great names, classic example, Oyama Sensei, I was told, they're really, you go there, they'll make you sign stuff to say every other style's wrong. And I went and I met, there was a bit of gangsterish around him. There's some of the characters around him, the permanent and shades, they look like a load of yakuza. But the man himself was very approachable, extremely friendly. He was you could tell he was a tough character. He was Korean, and he'd lived through a lot of tough racist situations, and he made a mark for himself. And I realized some of the stuff that was being said about him was because at the core it was racist, it was anti-Korean. He himself was quite an interesting character. I'm more interested about you, be asking about your training, what you're doing, okay? And it wasn't about him, which I really liked. Anoida Sensei was the same. You got this idea that he was this tough character, Anoida Tora the tiger, okay? And he was actually a really approachable individual. Okay, his karate was carte blanche basic Shotokan. I used to ask him I'd show him stuff from stuff I'd learned on applications when I was with him with ONeal Sensei, and he's classic, just to punch them in the throat. That was his answer to everything. And, he made it work. And he was a great motivator. He motivated his karate, if you look at it, compared to some of the other people who, if you go for that Shotokan purist form, wasn't the nicest if you look at that ilk of doing karate. But he was a great motivator, one of the best motivators I've ever trained with. Yeah. Other people, I met Fumio Demura Sensei, and I met Fumio Demura Sensei and trained with him at different times of his life, and he was always consistent every time. He was a really nice guy. Okay, he was very keen on expressing his martial arts and making his students the best students he could. Takio Kubota, who I met, who was teaching at the LAPD, barking mad, the most scariest man I've ever met. Okay, but again, he'd sit down with everybody. Lowest grade to high grade. There was none of this being separate from anybody, because he had to teach police officers. And it's a well-known fact that Nishiyama Sensei had that gig before him, and they sacked Nishiyama because Nishiyama went and then just taught a straightforward Shotokan karate class, marched them all up and down, and they said, no, we need to teach police officers how to deal with somebody at the same time retain their firearm. And Kubota, who'd been an undercover cop in Japan, knew all about that, and he came in and revolutionized how they should train. But they were all very approachable. The one guy I did meet that had an influence, which I think had a very positive influence, was I met one of the first generation, and Hironobu, and he was old when I met him, and he was one of Funakoshi's first generation students. And what impressed me was his attitude to life. Although he was aging, and it was not long before he passed away, he he seemed to have a really good philosophy about aging. And as I've got older, I suddenly now sort of relate to it. I think I was 20 when I first met him and interviewed him, and he was talking. I used to use the concept that, funny enough, Yamazaki used to use. He used to call it age karate, and he was saying, he said, people should be still active all their life.
Mm.
And he said something that has stuck with me. He says, the minute you sit down and start getting out of chair by using your hands, you've given up. And it's stuck with me ever since, because ever since, even now, I never use my hands to help me out of a chair. I will stand straight up out of the chair. And it stuck with me. And my wife, who sits on the floor constantly, she never sits on a chair. Okay, she's just turned 60. She stands straight up.
Mm.
Never. And I watch and I go, this is a cultural thing, but it's an important thing about staying active. And I think that's the most important thing I can do now, because as we get older, the enemies that we're like to meet change. And the one enemy you're never going to get away from is old age.
Mm.
And as you get older, that's the real enemy you're fighting. Okay. So keeping moving is that critical thing. Like today, after I finish this, I'll walk down to the village post office. I'll come back and I'll hit the Makawara for half an hour. Then I've got some paperwork to do. The whole idea is to keeping active. And I think, if anything, that's the beauty of being involved in the martial arts, because it does keep you active. I watch you, okay, for instance. I watch the stuff you put up, but I know during that day, you will have done several different bits of martial arts activity that have kept you moving and active before you've come up and gone, right, I'm going to record this. Yeah. Okay. And then we have the entertaining comments that come afterwards. But it's the fact is that you are thinking about it and you're moving all the time. Okay. And I think that's the admirable thing. And I keep seeing okay too much, by the way.
Mm. Yeah, I use, so I had a stage where I was kind of focusing only on martial arts, bunkais, fighting, sports, whatever. But now I'm drifting more towards longevity, and something that my friend said to me, Stack, that martial skills you might use sometimes, but ability to move you're gonna use always.
That's good. I'm going to nick that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. That's absolutely true.
So, so we do a lot in our training, like mobility, activity. People say, "Oh, but that's not martial skills." No, but it supports my longevity, and I can do martial arts longer if I'm able to move.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's you look at now, and I look at me. If I'd looked at my grandparents at my age, they weren't doing the stuff I'm doing. Okay, they were moving in a different way. It's a bit unfair because both my grandmother and my grandfather on both sides were pretty active. Okay, but if I look at that generation, by the time they got to 55, they were sitting down and that was it. They'd sit and watch the box in the corner and do very little else. And I think now as people are doing a lot more for a lot longer, and we're living longer everywhere. Yeah, and the fact is that the ultimate enemy has got to be old age. You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very
So
true.
yeah, you're absolutely right.
Can you tell me more about your project with John Johnson and Steve Law, the Three Amigos?
Well, for a start, the Three Amigos name came by accident, and it was actually a bit of fun. But what actually happened was, long before we started calling it the Three Amigos, we got together and we got on as three individuals. I've always got on with Johnny all my life. I've known Johnny for donkey's years. I hadn't known Steve for that long. I knew his instructor better because he was, he was a peer of Terry ONeal Sensei's, and I'd met him through Terry ONeal. But when I met Steve, I liked that he did his research in detail. His communication skills were very unique, and that his ability to transmit what his knowledge and his research was very good. And with Johnny has grown up from years of practicality, and he used to hide his skill set very carefully away from the public arena. And now, as you know, he's in his 70s. He's living proof. If you keep moving, you can keep moving forever. And the whole idea of the project we brought together was to exchange some of the concepts and ideas, and there was, because of my background and knowledge, I'd built up quite a bit. So I know sometimes Steve will come to me as a form of acknowledgement. He doesn't need to. His research is good. Johnny, I've always liked working with Johnny. It's been it's not just the physical martial arts. You know, we get on as two human beings, and that was really the basis of the three of us working together. Was that we actually enjoyed each other's company, and anybody else that wants to come on the journey with us is great. You know, so we then said, okay, well, let's look at a number of topics and give people multiple different views of the same thing, because some of the stuff will gel with one person, some of the stuff will gel with another person, and that's what we've found. So I'll give you a classic example. We worked on specific katas, we worked on a specific theme, and we've given 3 interpretations of the same thing, or done 3 how can I put it, 3 classes to get the same message across, but in a slightly different way with our own each individual flavor. And I think one of the big core of it is that he's getting across to people there are many different paths to the same end, and that they actually all overlap, but it's down to how an individual communicates it. But certain teachers will work with certain individuals, other teachers will work with other individuals. Yeah. And I've noticed that if I look at when we've done the 3 Amigos and they become bigger and bigger and bigger events, there's all you get what I call the converts. They've been through the journey, and then they get it and they're enjoying it, and so they'll keep coming back for more. Then you've got the transients that drop in and drop out, and then you get the newbies. So we become like a religious cult. Yeah. So for some, it's like a baptism by fire. Others go, I've been looking for this. There was something missing. Others have gone, you can see them go, I'm not ready yet for this. So it as a project, it started off as just 3 mates getting together as an exchange of concepts and ideas, and look for similarities and overlaps, and look for things that we may have missed that the other one's got. And then we realized we gelled as a team, and it's just gone from there. And so there's probably, when we first started, I've got to be honest, Les, when we first started, there was probably less structure to what we were doing. Now there's more structure. We agree what we're going to teach for each 3 Amigos. We don't rehearse it. We go, right, I'm going to cover this. What are you covering? Oh, you're covering that. Okay, that interacts with the bit that you're doing here. We just get on and then do it. And it appears to be working well. And when it stops working well, we'll stop it. I think none of us are, we're not holding on to everything. I work with very few other people. Only because I've got to an age where I'm doing a lot of my own thing. Okay. And I don't get invited by lots of other people. So today when you invited me for this was like, oh, that's really nice. Okay. But if people ask me, oh, will you do Can we do something together? I'll go, yeah, okay. You know, whereas Johnny does a lot with Ian Abernathy. Okay, Steve has done a bit with a few other people. We've done a few of the mental health awareness things, which I think is a great idea. Okay, we did a big one this year, and there was quite a few of us. Okay, and I intend that we should continue doing that. Okay, but I think the reason it works so well is that we're all three of us are relatively open, and we're not. None of us believe we've got all the bloody answers. I still don't. I mean, it's getting on for 57 years of being involved in the martial arts. Oh, discount the first 6 because you're a kid and you know bugger all. I'm still picking up new stuff. I'm still going, oh, that's interesting. I'll watch you and I'll go, oh, I'm going to nick that. And I'll go away. And I think that's how you have to be. But one of the things I always do, I always give credit. I'll go, people say, I was watching Les Bubka today and he did this. Let's have a go. And I'll do that. I always give credit to where I've got it from. I never go, and here I have developed this. I had a funny story when I did the Shotokan Oyo DVDs years and years ago. I got invited to go and teach in Canada. And unbeknown to me, there was a guy who'd had all the set of DVDs and purporting that he'd invented it himself, which was quite entertaining because I had a couple of guys saying, oh, Sensei does all of this. Looks very similar. And then I later found out that's what he'd been doing. And I'm going, well, that's good. And the guy never turned up on the course. I met him the next time I went out to teach. And I said, you just give it credit. I said, I don't care what you're doing with it, as long as you're doing something with it. I said, and I always give credit to people. If there was something that Canisius particularly taught, we were doing something on Monday night in class. And, I'll always give it credit to where I got it from. Okay. To come up with something that I think is completely unique to me, I'll actually look and feel, because I don't, it's been like doing music. You get something in your head and you go, yeah, well, that's a great tune. Okay, and I've heard musicians say to me, then I've realised I've actually heard it somewhere else 3 years ago. And I think martial arts is a bit like that. Until one of us grows another arm out the middle of our chest, or another leg, it's pretty universal what we're doing. Okay, I think some of the core principles you can wrap it in Filipino philosophy, mainland Japanese philosophy, Okinawan philosophy, Malay. It doesn't matter where you wrap it with. Okay, that's your vehicle. Everything else is you. Yeah, and where you pick stuff up from, I just always give it credit to where I get it from, and I think that means that I'm still learning.
I think so. Yeah, I like to credit people as well. But yeah, as you said, there's many people around who don't bother.
No, but that's called having a god complex.
Very true. You also got a free Amigos DVD.
Yes.
Can you tell us where it's available and where we can find you and so on?
So it's actually a download, and it's available from my website. You can actually, and you email the website, and they set up a download for you. The people who run the website, you can actually buy the physical DVD. But we found when we did it, more people were buying downloads than they were actual DVDs. But that was conceptual. That was really a show winner to give people an idea of what we were doing. And we took Pasai or Basai, okay, and did some different elements from that for that download. We're planning to do a couple more, which are a little bit more on core concepts that you see from Okinawan martial arts and relate them to modern training. Because some of it gets lost in translation. You go, so you say mumichi about stickiness. To some people, they don't quite understand what that means. So you can actually give a written explanation, but it'll still get lost. You need to physically show what is meant by using that term. And I think there are a whole load of terms that get used in karate. They're used in martial arts in general, and they get lost in translation. Speaking Japanese, reading Japanese, and being able to translate from kanji, okay, are great skill sets. But if you look at kanji, it's an illustrated picture, it's a pictorial language. And sometimes the meaning is not clear from the translation. Looking up at I was able to ask Kanishi several times on stuff like this and to get a very clear understanding. His son as well was very helpful. Yamazaki Sensei was also very, very good on this. And because Yamazaki spent, most of his life in America, he spoke very good English. And you could get very clear understanding of things from him. And he did, which was really nice, a number of lectures, which I videoed, okay, which I'd never seen, and many of the other senior Japanese do. But because you could articulate it well, you could, right, now I understand it. Because it's like Bunkai Oyo Henka, everybody thinks it's the same thing, and it isn't. It's a process. Bunkai breaking down, yeah? Oyo is then you actually working on it, you analyzing it, and then Henka are the variations that you may come out with that work well for you. So you can go from, so they talk about Bunkai Oyo Henka as a process, but the bulk of your work is Oyo Henka, yeah? Okay, and then people go, well, am I learning? No, you're not learning. You're just working on application. Okay, and you decided to use that bit of element as your stimulant for that application. Now you've got to test it. Yeah. There's a lot of repetition because of what we are, a fallen creature with a head. A lot of repetition of what we do is going to get repeated. And that's what you should be looking for. Go, well, people go about habitual acts of violence. I want to be working on the bits of habitual acts of violence that give me the variables. And the variables it happens when, depending on the position of the human being is or where he comes from. It's like, a lot of people don't realize is that you start to look at kata structure. Kata structure is to be broken down. The embusen is not relevant. The embusen is just a framework. When people attack you, the clue is, in a lot of the earlier kata, you're going off into your peripheral vision all the time because that's where you're vulnerable. When somebody stands in front of you, as long as you maintain reasonable distance, you're not that vulnerable. You are, but you're not as vulnerable as somebody blindsiding you. Okay, somebody coming out your peripheral vision, that's where you're really vulnerable. So you need to train your flinch reaction for somebody coming that way. Yeah, and if you look at Pinan and Heian katas, that's what the first move is, always into that blind side and your worst side, your useless left side, unless you're left-handed like me. And that it's some of that core understanding of why things were structured in a certain way and why the deconstruction is so important, and that you should end up then with training the deconstruction, not the construction, if you know what I mean. And that's where we've got lost, because lots of people train the construction, not the deconstruction. It's the deconstruction that's the important bit. The construction is just a way of drilling yourself when you've got nobody to work with, because you're Billy No Mates for a day because everybody's gone off to work and you're left at home or whatever. So now I think there are people that are seeing that for what it really is, which is good. So I think the community is going to get even more divided, okay, because you're going to have all the different mirages of different types of competition, and then you're going to have the deconstruction, they say over here, ripping stuff to pieces and making it effective, and then looking for similarities. Again, and that's, you often hear lots of people go, oh yeah, crap, you're all saying, oh, we've got that move in such and such a kata. Yeah, they should have, because movement is movement and it's universal. And if it's not, then there's something missing. Yeah. So I've stopped saying that statement now deliberately. When people, they'll show me something they've learned in a Krav Maga class, or they've learned it from doing a bit of MMA, and I'm going, I zip it and don't say, oh, that's in such and such a kata. So, oh, great. Yeah, I could work that one. That's my latest. I can work that one. So it's also empowering them. It's encouraging people to be positive, instead of going, oh, God, he always says it's in karate. It's empowering people. That's the word I was looking for before. Yeah, I think it's empowering people's good. No matter what they're
definitely.
doing, no matter what they're doing, um, you know, treating people with a positive rather than a negative. The negative is that's in such and such a kata. No, I can work with that. I like that. Okay. I'm saying the same thing. They don't get it, but I'm saying the same thing, but in a positive way. Yeah.
Yeah. Simon, thank you for your time. It was lovely talking to you.
It's been a pleasure, Les. And let's get together soon.
Yes, yes. I'm teaching in Derby actually on the 11th with John and Craig and Max Beddow. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Well,
I'll be
if I'm around, I'll get up and come and see you.
will be lovely. But yeah, definitely gonna come and do Free Amigos because he's on my list, but it's always something jumping up.
Busy boy.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure, Les. See you soon. Bye now.
Sports Social Podcast Network.